Hi, thank you for taking the time to join us for this asynchronous virtual talk slash workshop. Today we're going to be talking about design as a language, really understanding what that means, why design is a language, and like how that then informs how we speak it and how we use it. And so the first half is going to be a talk looking at the language of design, breaking it down, understanding it. The second half is going to be then putting it into practice in a workshop, giving you an opportunity to test it out and understand how you can then use this information as you work through design in the future. To start, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Lisa Frank. I'm strategy director at Tavern Agency, a branding agency focused on food, bev, and hospitality. Linguist, as you'll see on the bottom, the mention of Linguist and on the last page, is essentially my side project where I obsess over this idea that design is a language and dig into understanding what that means to designers and how we can use it to make our designs better. But essentially, I have about 10 years of experience working in the branding industry. I was a designer to start. About 2 years in, was working on a brand management team at Mack Trucks, realized I just love thinking about this and understanding it and understanding how I can help designers do better work as a strategist and how I can help create brands in a better way. So that essentially inspired me to become a brand strategist, and I've been doing that ever since. I've worked with a wide array of brands. Honestly, the bulk of my experience, interestingly, has been between spirits and wellness, which is an odd combination, but it works. I've learned a lot through that. I've worked with a lot of different big companies like Beam Suntory and Diageo on the left, working with Guinness, Bailey's, Old Crow, and some other brands behind the scenes at Beam Suntory. On the right, I've worked with Reckitt's and Myriad Genetics, looking at like vitamins, supplements, personal care products, as well as like really getting into the nitty-gritty of the medical stuff with Myriad. So really very different worlds. I've also obviously through Tavern worked very extensively with Sizzler, a brand we just recently relaunched, and with KinderCare in the past. So really, I've worked across the board at a wide variety of different industries and have learned quite a bit through that about how design works in all these different worlds and what we can learn from that. And so I want to be talking about that today and really sharing those insights with you. And essentially, what I've learned through my work on Linguist, as well as just my work in my career, is that really at the end of the day, design is not an art. It is a language. It is a beautiful craft that takes a lot of technical skill, but we're not just doing it to create things for the world. We're creating things for companies oftentimes. We're being paid to do design, and we're being paid to help these companies be more successful. And the way that we do that is by communicating. And ultimately, brands use design to instantly communicate why we should buy their product. Athletic Greens, for example, when you look at their packaging, you get a feel for the brand. You get a feel for some of the information about it, even without them saying anything. You start to pick up on like their vibe. Does that seem like it would be appropriate for me as a customer? I don't know. Maybe yes. And so design is really helping brands to communicate a lot more effectively and quickly because shoppers are using design to read essentially what they're reading design to essentially quickly and easily find what they're looking for, because we don't have all day to read. If you were in the grocery store and everything was just written lists of information, you would never leave the supermarket. You would spend all day in there. So design just makes everything a lot more subconscious, a lot more almost like a gut reaction. You're like, oh, that's spicy, that's fruity, that's flavorful, that's natural. These are all the things I'm looking for. I'll just get them really quick. And even on brands that aren't in that like quick purchase situation, even B2B brands, you're still getting something from the visuals that tells me something about this brand, whether or not I should trust them, whether or not they're the kind of brand for me. We're learning a lot by reading this design. And we're all subconsciously reading the language of design every single day. We, like babies, learn English or at whatever language by just like hearing it all the time. We are just picking up on design that we're seeing across the board and learning it through that. And that's how we really came to understand it. The challenge that I see is that many designers don't take the time to consciously understand the language of design, even though they're using it every day. And that can be a challenge because if you don't know what you're doing, you're really just throwing spaghetti at the wall and it may or may not be working. And that is something that as a designer, we're being paid to do the work. We need to make sure our work is working. So Another, just for context, another name for the study of the language of design is semiotics. You'll hear a lot of bigger agencies refer to it this way. A lot of more academic research refers to it this way. Semiotics is essentially the study of signs and symbols and the meaning we put into them. And so this applies to design. It also applies to a lot of other things. But just for context, that's something that many people will refer to this as. But we're going to be focusing on it, thinking about it as if it's a language, and how framing it as a language really helps you to understand how it works. Because like any language, design follows very consistent rules and patterns. And that's especially what's interesting about thinking about it as a language, because you start to realize you see certain things being done across the board, across industries, across disciplines and things like that. You start to notice there really is a lot of consistency. Just like in sociology and psychology, humans just naturally start to fall into rules and patterns. English, for example, also there's verbs, there's adjectives, there's I before E except after C. It behaves very much like that. And the challenge to that, though, is that if I can figure all these patterns and rules out, so can AI. And I know there's a lot of turmoil in the design industry right now. I too feel that. And I believe that understanding the language of design better is going to help designers thrive in a world where AI also can understand it. Because if we don't understand something that AI does, we're not going to be able to compete. So something to think about. But essentially, so we need to understand the language of design in order to be better designers, in order to maintain our stance as designers in the future. So what does it mean to understand the language of design? What really it means is thinking about what are those rules and patterns that we need to know in order to understand it. So rule number 1, the language of design works through shared meaning. This is my biggest pet peeve. There's, especially for design students, you often have someone come to the table of a crit and they've got a whole paragraph written, almost an essay written about, this is the secret meaning behind my design. And like, as we'll talk about here, speaking doesn't do any good if no one understands the words that you're saying. So if you make up the secret meaning and if you make up these secret words, fun, but it doesn't mean anything to any of the people that you're speaking to. In the same way, hidden meaning doesn't actually mean much to the average person. All it means is it says something to you as the designer. It's fun for you. It says something to the person you explain it to, and that can be fun. But across the board, most hidden meaning isn't going to be moving the needle. I don't know if any of you have seen the infamous like Pepsi guidelines. At one point, Pepsi had done a rebrand and someone had done all of this deep dive into the behind the scenes, like hidden meaning behind the brand. It was a universe. It was facial expressions. It was energy fields. And none of this means anything to the customer at the end of the day. I've never noticed any of this. I'm not going to pick up on any of this because it's not real. It's just made up. And that's the case for hidden meaning, which is why it's my pet peeve. What's on the surface essentially is what's actually selling for design. And if we were live, I would be asking this as a question, but maybe you can pause your screens here and just sit for a second and think about, what are all of these images saying to me? Individually, together, what are they communicating about this brand? What can I take away about what Pepsi is as a brand? Essentially, all I'm picking up as a customer from this is that their design style is communicating that they're a modern brand. There are some other littler things like flavor, like maple syrup and cherries and things like that. But across the board, generally, the main thing I'm picking up on is that this is contemporary and it's lively, it's vibrant. As a customer, that's about it. This does not mean that you can't make up new words. If you know, you know. There's so many different new words going around, and acronyms and things like that. You can make up things, but in the same way as you go read through Urban Dictionary, most people aren't going to know what they mean, and you're going to have to explain it to them. So, like I said, you have to explain it to them. So you just have to be really ready to invest a lot of time and money to educate your audience. So if you look at, for example, these different symbols that have been created to help communicate the how to recycle, how to treat the waste and things like that. The government or whoever has created these actually has had to spend a lot of money creating guides to these in order to help people understand. So it can be quite expensive. So what it means for brands, you really have two options. You can spend a lot of time and money to explain your design, or you can work within the limits of the existing language of design. So much easier, so much less expensive. My recommendation. If you really want to spend a lot of money, you can make up some symbols, but it's not going to help you otherwise. So again, rule number one, the language of design works through shared meaning. You need to be thinking about what already is out there. And the way that we can assess what's already out there in the world is by understanding how it works. So the language of design essentially operates in 2 layers, and that's how you can start to pick it apart. So layer number 1 is what you say. Hello, how are you? Layer number 2 is how you say it. Hello, how are you? The tone, the inflection, what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, really it can be picked apart in a really interesting way, because the different ways that you say something really make a big difference. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. So essentially, layer number 1 is signposts. You can think of them as symbols if you want. It's essentially the what you say, familiar design elements that act as a shorthand for specific people, places, things, or ideas. A strawberry is a signpost. When I look at this, I know it's a strawberry, and most people do, unless you've never had a strawberry before. But essentially, most people are going to look at this and say, I get that. And that's what signposts are. Signposts are very familiar to many people. They're not too niche or specific to any one person. They're the kind of thing that can be repeated over and over again, and people are just going to get it. So for example, this includes symbols in a more traditional sense that have become familiar to people. So peace signs, yin yang, emojis even count as signposts. So when I see these, I get what they mean. I get what they're telling me. I have seen them before. It kind of expands as well, though, into any image, shape, or color that you can recognize. That could be a signpost, and it's trying to tell you something. So if you look at all of these across the board, they've got a green leaf, a farm image, the color green in and of itself, all could be used to communicate organic or natural. And that's something that's a signpost for organic and natural. And so when you look at those products on the page here, these brands are essentially using these signposts of green and leaves and farms to quickly and easily say why you should buy my product, because my product is natural, my product is organic. And it makes it so much faster for people to pick that up in the store. They see, you're looking for diapers, okay, you get the regular ones, or do you want the natural ones? And it very quickly distinguishes the two. There's a green leaf on each and every one of these, and there's the color green, and there's the fields on the one on Stonyfield Organic. So they're all using this signpost to help communicate what they do. And styles is the second half of the picture, like I said, essentially how you say it. This strawberry looks very different from the one we saw before, which looks very different from a strawberry designed in another style. And essentially what a style is, we all know this, it's combinations of a lot of different design elements that work together to create some sort of vibe, something very specific, and you get that. It's this one specifically is watercolor painting, it's handmade and things like that. It says a little bit more in a different way. And the style that you use to design something does say a lot about the thing you're designing. So for example, a chicken. Here we go. This is the chicken. It's maybe a woodcut drawing. That says one thing about it. It looks photorealistic for the most part. It looks maybe a little old style. Then this one here is a little more fun and quirky and cute. That says something very different to me than the one that we previously just saw. It could be for kids. It could be more fun. It could be so on and so forth. The style of this one, adding also some other signposts in there of the sunglasses and the anarchist stuff, it's punk rock. Essentially, this is punk rock chicken. That says something very different to me than the cute, friendly kid chicken, which says something very different to me than the NFT chicken. So really the style that you use really builds a lot of meaning into your design, and it is a really big part of that. So styles and symbols work together. Styles can be layered on top of symbols and signposts, or they could be used to communicate their own, their own. Styles can be layered on top of signposts, or they can be used on their own to communicate different things. And the way that they work together says a lot about the brand. So on the left, we have something that's a little more signpost forward. Basically, photos are the most signpost you can get, because there is some styling to photos, but it really is pretty recognizable instantly to people what it is that you're trying to show. So On the left, we have a picture of olives that essentially is as simple as it can get. On the right, we have almost no olive, and it's maybe the color, but really in general, it's very style forward. It's all about the style. In the middle, we've got California Olive Ranch, which is, still has a picture of the olive, but it's done in a little more modern, a little more premium, a little more minimalist way. On Brightland, it almost becomes a metaphor, the flavor for the flavor of the olive oil, the floral kind of flavors that are in there. So you start to get a little further away from the actual image that you're trying to say, and it starts to get a little more broad, a little bit more stylized, essentially. And styles kind of work like jargon or slang. So they're associated with and used by specific types of people. So a teenager is going to say something, kind of use very different language than a doctor is going to use. Things like comorbid. A tech bro is going to say something very different even than a doctor. Disruption, bankers, APR, APY, like each industry has its own like words, and each age group also has its own words that are kind of like show that you're in the in crowd if you know what they're saying. Or really just like help you communicate with each other. But in a sense, style is very subjective. It's belongs to certain different subgroups. And because it's so subjective, it helps brands attract or speak to different like consumers and need states. And it gets very specific. So I say need states because the same customer could buy all of these. I think I have bought all of these brands at some point. And maybe I'm in different moods and I want to tap into a different side of my personality, though, for different situations. Evian maybe a little bit more like on the go, just grabbing something. Smart Water when I'm feeling a little healthier. Liquid Death when I'm feeling a little more rebellious or I'm in a bar. La Croix when I want some more flavor and feel like want something a little like washes over me and is tasty. Perrier and Aquapana. The kind of things that you would buy when you're having a little more of like a bougie picnic or something like that, or having a fancier situation. So each of these says something very different to me. They're all water, but they all speak to me in very different ways. And style is the piece of the design that's doing that here. And often we find that the more stylized a design is, the more niche the audience that brand is targeting. Because style is so specific to certain types of people and moods, it does tend to be a little bit more of a niche market. And so we do find that mass brands tend to be more signpost forward. Because it is able to speak to everyone. A picture of an olive is something that isn't going to turn anyone off. And a lot of brands rely very heavily on signposts because they don't want to turn anyone off. As you start to get a little bit more expensive, as you start to get a little bit more niche, brands really lean heavily into style to create something that feels like it speaks to a specific type of person and really hook that niche target market that they're trying to win over. And because style is so strongly associated with identity, inconsistent style can really undermine brand building efforts. This brand here is a mass brand. They focus on a very signpost-led type of branding. They do, however, have a few different styles going on, and this is all one brand. If I were to look at this without the logo, I'm really not going to pick up, aside from the packaging format, I'm not going to pick up a lot on this all being the same. I'm going to be more focused on the rest of the packaging. The brand itself is kind of almost secondary to me. Yes, it's Yoplait, but I'm more paying attention to the other things that are going on the pack because the styles are so chaotic and so different. And the reason why that's important is because consistent style builds brand equity and it builds consumer trust. So when you get into the industry and you're working on design, if you're working on branding, style helps to build the equity of the brand just as much as the assets do. And it essentially is creating this consistency that builds trust where if I behave differently every time I interacted with someone, they're going to start to think I'm a little crazy. They're going to start to think maybe I'm not as trustworthy because they don't see that I'm consistent and that I can deliver consistently every time in the same way. Branding is the same. Customers subconsciously feel a little less trusting of brands that don't give them a consistent look and feel. And beyond the logo, the style really helps to build that, and the style really helps to build a lot of trust. So in this case of this brand, the consistent style of the bottles and the minimalism of the design, as well as like the clear bottles, is building this equity. It's building trust with the consumer. It's building a certain aesthetic and a sense of who this brand is as well. And they really know who they are. Whereas this last brand we looked at, Yoplait doesn't really know who they are. Yoplait is whoever you want them to be. Whereas Method, which is this brand, they know who they are and they know who you want them to be, and they are being that. You can start to play around with style a little bit once you are a massive brand with a really strong identity that everyone recognizes, but you don't want to mess with your core brand too much. You really want that to be coming through in like sub brands, which is where you almost like spin off the brand a little bit into like smaller things. So Nike's a great example of this. These 3 images are 3 very different ways that Nike comes to life in small ways, in small campaigns or little brands that they have for just like specific product lines. But still, overall, you can picture in your mind who Nike is and what they look like because they have built such a strong style and built such a strong identity. So it's not recommended to vary your style too much until you get to the point where the brand is super established, and only in certain scenarios should you be varying that style. So again, the language of design works through shared meaning, and it works in 2 layers. The final and third rule is essentially that because design is a language, it works across categories. It isn't something that is relegated to, what's happening in soap, what's happening in cleaning products, what's happening in the grocery aisle, all across the board. What's happening in all of those is kind of pinging off of one another. And it's something that, because like I said, we're learning the language of design all day, every day, and everything that we see and we do, there is a lot of crossover. Maybe it doesn't look like it, but when you start to pay attention, you start to notice what that is. So products and services are grouped into categories to make it easier for shoppers to find what they're looking for. Protein shakes are all grouped together, and many of them do look similar. Chocolate bars as well, sparkling water. Brands live within these categories because it makes it easy for customers to find them. They know which shelf it's going to be on. And brands in the same category often use similar signposts and styles, and that creates what we call category codes. Essentially, across the board, you see a lot of the same thing in the same categories. So if you look at these brands specifically, all of them have like a little bit of a burst of light or an explosion on them. And that's a very common thing to see in like legacy cleaning products. Like what it's trying to say really is like, we're powerful, we're going to clean, everything's going to be sparkly clean when we're done with it. And it's something that you see not in all the newer brands, but a lot of like older cleaning brands do tend to have this. And this is like an established category code. It's something that a lot of different brands are doing in this category. And category codes can be beneficial. They can help brands fit into their category, and they can make it easier for shoppers to get what they're selling and like not have to be too confused. So like, for example, a lot of sensitive toothpastes are pink because it helps them stand out from the other ones. And for customers that are shopping for sensitive toothpaste, they want to more quickly find it. So you can use category codes and things like that to really help people quickly find what they're looking for. But the challenge with category codes is that the more brands use them, the more it starts to feel like everyone's just saying the same thing. We all know when we get to the milk aisle that we are looking at milk. And yet not every, but many milk brands have a picture of a glass of milk with milk being poured into it. Essentially all that they're saying is, I'm a milk. But it's interesting how many of them choose to use that. And this is where category codes start to go awry, because everybody starts to look the same. Everyone says the same thing. It doesn't mean much to the customer at the end of the day. And it almost like detracts from the brand itself, because the brand becomes a little more recessive. This is an interesting challenge, and it happens in every industry that I've seen, that I've worked in. It's a very easy problem, or a very easy mistake to make. A lot of marketers do this because they don't necessarily even realize they're doing it, because they're so focused on their own brand or category. For example, down here, I have done some digging into the protein space and thinking about like also looking at just the same words that are being used across the board. Every single one of these brands says they're the highest quality. They have the highest standards of quality. Everybody's effective. Everybody's the best selling, the leader. Everyone's fueling something and helping you succeed and maximizing your potential and it's all about your success. And in the language that we use and in the design that we use, it's very common for marketers to start to use the same things as all their competitors, because we're so focused on our own brand, we sometimes don't realize how similar we are to everyone else, at least in the eyes of consumers. We as marketers look at our brands and see all the differences and nuances, but we don't communicate that very well to customers oftentimes. So over-reliance on category codes can have you sounding exactly like everyone else. So to stand out from the crowd, brands need to look beyond their category for inspiration for new things to say. Liquid Death did a great job of this. Nobody in water was doing anything this crazy before Liquid Death came in. And they brought a completely new perspective to this idea of mountain water by bringing in just a punk rock aesthetic that was really wild and off the wall. And brands that essentially like come in, create this new inspiration, they're looking for new things to say, they bring that to the table and it allows them to establish new category codes. So it expands on what it means to be a part of a category. Old plant-based meat was always about being natural and about being healthy and about clean, and like it all feels kind of medicinal, or also like a little bit like green and all that. A lot of new brands, Impossible came in and shook things up. They brought a new category code. It's disruptive, it's new, it's different, it's bold. And now we see a lot of brands also hopping on that bandwagon and doing that. So another thing, when you bring a new style or a new aesthetic or a new meaning into something, a lot of people are going to copy you, and that's fine. You're going to do it better than them, or you have to. So essentially, that's the 3 rules of the language of design. We've got the language of design works through shared meaning. We have to understand it in order for it to be useful. And it works in 2 layers, signposts and styles. Those 2 things help to communicate what you're selling, why you're selling it, who you're selling it to. And because design is a language, it works across categories. So if we want to understand the language of design, we need to be paying attention to, if we want to understand what's going to work in our category, we need to be looking at what's happening in other categories as well, because those same design cues can work just as well in ours if we find the right way to use them. And my pro tip is then to get out there and look at the language. If you want to learn the language design, you need to be looking around the supermarket, looking at all the different categories. What are all the different brands saying? How are they saying it? What do I recognize across categories? And what's different across categories? How are people using their category codes? How are they breaking out of their category codes? What all are these brands saying? So now we are going to switch on over to the second video. We're going to look at the workshop and break it down, how we can use this, and I'll walk you through trying this out and using the language of design for yourselves. So awesome. Thank you for joining me thus far. I'm excited to hop on over to the next side.